I never thought I'd be the jealous type. Sophie and I had only been married a year, and though things hadn't exactly been smooth sailing, I still believed we were stronger than most couples. But lately, things were different. It started small, like these things always do. Sophie would mention her boss, Ben, every now and then. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, she had landed a new position at work and was excited about it, which I fully supported. Ben seemed to be a good mentor, or so she claimed. But then, she started talking about him a little too much. It wasn't just about work anymore. I noticed how she'd bring him up during dinner, casually slipping his name into conversations that had nothing to do with her job. "Ben's so funny," she'd say, or "Ben always knows what to do when we're in a bind." It was subtle, but the way her face lit up when she talked about him, it was the kind of look I hadn't seen from her in a while. Not when she looked at me, at least. I told myself I was being paranoid. I knew that work relationships could be close, especially when there was a lot of pressure. It was like a switch had flipped in my head. Every time she mentioned his name, a tiny spark of jealousy flared up inside me, and I couldn't ignore it. Then came the night that changed everything. Sophie had been unusually quiet during dinner, distracted, and her phone kept buzzing on the table next to her. I couldn't help but glance at it every time it lit up. She noticed and quickly turned the screen over, which only made me more suspicious. I didn't say anything, but the tension in the room was thick. After dinner, she finally looked up from her phone with an awkward smile. "I forgot to tell you, I've got this big conference coming up next week," she said. "It's out of town, and well, Ben's going too. We're going together." There it was. The knot in my stomach tightened. "Together?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Like, just the two of you?" "Yeah," she said, a little too casually. "It's part of the job. Don't worry, it's all business. We'll be in meetings all day." She must have noticed the look on my face because she quickly added, "It's not a big deal, Liam. We'll be staying at different hotels. It's just work." I forced a smile, but inside, my mind was racing. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being that insecure husband who reads into things that aren't there. But something about the way she said it, the way her excitement seemed to bubble just beneath the surface, made it impossible for me to let it go. The days leading up to her trip were tense. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was mostly arguments. I tried to bring up Ben in a calm, rational way, but every time I did, Sophie would get defensive. "He's just my boss," she'd snap. "Why are you being like this? You're making something out of nothing." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But every time I saw her on her phone, smiling at a message, my mind filled with doubts. Was she texting him? What were they talking about? I hated feeling like this, like some paranoid husband who couldn't trust his own wife, but I couldn't help it. One evening, as I passed by while she was texting, I caught a glimpse of her screen. It was from Ben. He'd sent her a message saying something like, "Looking forward to spending more time together at the conference." Winky face. That wink, that stupid little wink at the end of his message, set my blood boiling. I confronted her right then and there. "Are you kidding me?" I blurted out. "He's your boss, Sophie. What the hell is this supposed to mean?" Sophie looked startled, and then her face hardened. "It's just a joke, Liam," she said, her voice dripping with irritation. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Am I?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, this doesn't look like a joke. It looks like something else." She rolled her eyes and shook her head. "You're being ridiculous. He's just a friend, and you're turning this into something it's not." But I wasn't convinced. The damage had been done. That message, that damn wink, had planted a seed of doubt in my mind that I couldn't uproot. I was no longer sure if this was just paranoia, or if I was finally seeing the cracks in our marriage that had been there all along. As her trip got closer, Sophie became more distant. She spent more time at work, preparing for the conference, or at least that's what she told me. I wanted to believe her, but my instincts told me something else. I started paying more attention to the little things. How she'd suddenly start laughing at her phone, how she'd get defensive whenever I asked about her day, how she seemed to light up whenever she talked about Ben. I wasn't sleeping well anymore. Every night, I'd lie awake next to her, wondering what was really going on. Was she thinking about him? Did she want to be with him instead of me? The jealousy was eating me alive, and I didn't know how to stop it. The night before her trip, I finally brought it up again. I don't like this, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I don't like that you're going with him. It doesn't feel right. Sophie sighed, clearly annoyed. Liam, it's just work. Why can't you trust me? I do trust you, I lied. I just don't trust him. She shook her head, exasperated. I can't believe we're having this conversation again. You need to stop. This is getting out of hand. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was overreacting. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And deep down, I knew that when she left for that conference, I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about what might happen while she was gone. As Sophie finished packing that night, I watched her, feeling helpless. The woman I had married barely a year ago felt like a stranger, and I didn't know how to reach her anymore. Tomorrow, she'd be gone, and I'd be left alone with my suspicions and fears. Little did I know, this trip would mark the beginning of the end for us. The morning of Sophie's trip felt like any other, but there was a heaviness in the air that I couldn't shake. She left early, her suitcase rolling behind her as she walked out the door. I'll call you tonight, she said with a smile, but it was hollow. I could see that she was already gone in her mind, her thoughts elsewhere, maybe with him. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself, burying myself in work, but my mind kept drifting back to Sophie and Ben. The thought of them together, laughing, maybe even flirting while away from home, gnawed at me. My imagination was running wild, and I couldn't stop it. That evening, she did call, just like she said she would. Her voice was cheerful, a little too cheerful, and she talked about how the conference was going. I asked her how Ben was, and there was a brief pause on the other end. He's fine, she said, trying to sound casual. We've been in meetings all day. I could hear the hum of background noise, probably from the hotel lobby or a restaurant. I wondered if Ben was there, sitting across from her, smiling that smug smile I'd imagined in my head. She hung up after a few minutes, promising to check in again tomorrow, but I couldn't shake the unease. It was like a shadow hanging over me, growing darker by the minute. The days passed slowly. Each night, Sophie called, but the conversations were brief. There was always a reason she couldn't talk for long meetings, dinners with colleagues, networking events. It all sounded plausible, but something inside me told me she wasn't giving me the full story. I tried not to push it, tried to act normal, but I knew she could sense the tension in my voice. I couldn't help it. The doubt was festering inside me, and every little thing she said only made it worse. On the third night, something changed. I was scrolling through social media, trying to keep myself busy when a message popped up from an old mutual friend, Sarah. It was a short message, just a few words, but it made my blood run cold. Hey, I saw Sophie and Ben together at a bar last night. They looked cozy. Cozy? What the hell did that mean? I immediately replied, asking for more details. Sarah, sensing my frustration, explained that she had been at the same hotel for an unrelated event and had seen them at the bar, sitting close, laughing, and talking like they were the only two people in the room. It didn't seem like just work, she wrote. I thought you should know. That was it. The knot in my stomach tightened, and I felt a surge of anger. I had to know more. I needed to confirm what was happening, even if the answer was something I didn't want to face. I called Sophie right away, my heart racing. She picked up after a few rings, sounding cheerful as always. Hey babe, what's up? I couldn't hold it in anymore. I talked to Sarah, I said, my voice tight. She saw you and Ben at the bar last night. She said you two looked close. There was silence on the other end, just the faint sound of her breathing. I waited, my pulse thudding in my ears. Liam, she finally said, her voice calm but strained. We were just having a drink after the conference. It's not a big deal. We're colleagues. You need to stop reading into things. I'm not reading into anything, I snapped, my patience worn thin. You didn't tell me you were going out with him after work. What else are you not telling me? Sophie let out a long sigh, the kind that made it clear she was tired of this conversation. I didn't tell you because it's not important. We went for a drink. That's it. You're making something out of nothing, Liam. But I wasn't convinced. The more she tried to brush it off, the more I felt like there was something she wasn't saying. Sophie, this isn't just about a drink. I know something's going on between you two. Her tone hardened. There's nothing going on, okay? You're being ridiculous. Ben is my boss, and we work together. That's it. The argument escalated from there, both of us raising our voices, accusations flying back and forth. She called me insecure, jealous, controlling. I called her secretive and dishonest. By the end of it, neither of us was willing to back down, and the call ended with her hanging up on me, her voice cold and clipped. I sat there, staring at the phone, feeling both furious and helpless. I didn't know what to believe anymore. The more I pushed, the more she denied. But that only made me more certain that something was happening behind my back. My trust in her was slipping away, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever get it back. The next day, I got another message, this time from a coworker of hers who happened to be at the same conference. She was more direct, sending me a video. In the clip, I saw Sophie and Ben walking out of a restaurant together, arms brushing against each other, her laughing at something he said. Then, in a moment that made my heart stop, I saw them holding hands as they crossed the street. I watched the video over and over, my stomach twisting into knots. This wasn't just my imagination anymore. This was real. I had the proof, and it was right in front of me. I knew what I had to do next, but the thought of confronting Sophie made my chest tighten with dread. When she called that night, I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not after what I'd seen. She left a voicemail, her tone softer than it had been the night before. Liam, I'm sorry about our fight. I don't want us to keep arguing. Can we talk when I get back? But I didn't want to talk. I wanted answers. I wanted the truth. And most of all, I wanted her to feel the same pain I was feeling. The next morning, I called a friend of mine, someone I knew could help me get to the bottom of all this. I told him everything about Sophie, about Ben, about the video. He agreed to keep an eye on things for me while I figured out what to do next. I wasn't just a suspicious husband anymore. I was a man on a mission, determined to find out just how deep this betrayal went. And when I did, I knew I wouldn't let Sophie walk away without facing the consequences. I was left to simmer in my own thoughts. Every minute she was away felt like a small eternity. The conference was supposed to be 3 days long, but in my mind, those 3 days stretched into an endless abyss of doubt, suspicion, and frustration. After our last argument, I had stopped responding to her calls and texts. I needed space to think and figure out what the hell I was going to do. On the first day of her trip, I received a message from my friend, Paul. He worked in the same industry as Sophie and had coincidentally attended a conference a few months ago where Ben had also been present. I know this isn't something you want to hear, man, Paul wrote, but I've heard some stuff about Ben. The guy has a reputation. You might want to be careful. That message sent a chill down my spine. A reputation? For what? Paul didn't elaborate, but I didn't need him to. Ben was charismatic, charming, and according to Sophie, a great leader. But now, I couldn't help but wonder if his leadership extended beyond the workplace, into the personal lives of women like my wife. Sophie called again that night. I watched the phone vibrate on the table for a few seconds before finally answering. Hey, I said, my voice flat. Liam, why haven't you been answering my texts? She asked, a hint of irritation creeping into her voice. I've been busy, I replied, keeping my tone distant. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not without more proof. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then Sophie let out a sigh. Look, I don't want to keep fighting with you. This trip is stressful enough without us being at each other's throats. Then why are you giving me reasons to doubt you? I shot back, my frustration finally bubbling to the surface. Ben is more than just your boss, isn't he? Liam, please don't start this again, she said, exasperation dripping from her voice. It's not what you think. I've told you 100 times, it's just work. I'm not hiding anything from you. I wanted to believe her. But that video, her hand in his, the way they laughed together played on a loop in my mind. You say it's just work, but how can I believe that when I've seen the way you two are together? She paused again, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice tight. Sarah saw you. She sent me a video, I said, my pulse quickening. You and Ben, walking out of that restaurant together, holding hands. How am I supposed to ignore that? There was a sharp intake of breath from Sophie's side, And then she spoke quickly, her words defensive. Liam, that was nothing. We were walking across the street. It wasn't. Look, I can explain. Can you? I challenged. Because right now, it looks like you're lying to me. She was silent for a few moments, and I could almost hear her scrambling to come up with an excuse. It was a stupid moment, she finally said. It didn't mean anything, Liam. I swear. We had dinner with a group of colleagues, and we were just walking back to the hotel. I didn't even realize we were holding hands. That's a pretty convenient explanation, I muttered, shaking my head. Do you really think I'd do that to you? Sophie asked, her voice breaking slightly. Do you think I'd throw everything away for someone like Ben? Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was the first time she sounded genuinely hurt, as if my accusations were cutting deeper than I had intended. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. What if I was wrong? What if my jealousy had clouded my judgment to the point where I couldn't see the truth anymore? But then I remembered Paul's message. The video. The way Sophie had been acting these past few weeks. No, I wasn't imagining things. Something was going on, and I needed to know exactly what. I don't know what to think, Sophie, I finally said, my voice softer but still resolute. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. Her voice cracked. Liam, please, I love you. I need you to believe me. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. Instead, I ended the call with a heavy heart, feeling more lost than ever. The next day, things took an unexpected turn. While sitting at home, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, I received a message from a mutual friend of ours, Jessica. She was always in the know when it came to gossip, and her message was no different. You won't believe this, but I just saw Sophie and Ben at a fancy restaurant. They looked, well, let's just say it didn't look professional. This time, she sent a photo. Sophie and Ben were sitting at a candlelit table, their heads leaned close together, smiling. My stomach churned as I stared at the image, rage boiling up inside me. I didn't even bother calling Sophie this time. What was the point? I had my answer. Whatever was going on between her and Ben wasn't just in my head, it was real. Later that evening, another message came through. This one from a coworker I barely knew but had mutual friends with. His message was simple but devastating. Saw Sophie and Ben holding hands at the bar. Thought you should know. I stared at my phone for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Sophie had lied to me. Over and over again, she had lied. And now I had undeniable proof. It wasn't just my imagination. It wasn't paranoia. It was betrayal. But instead of confronting her immediately, I did something unexpected. I made a decision. I wasn't just going to sit here and be the victim. If she was going to betray me, then I'd find a way to even the score. That night, as Sophie and Ben probably sat together, laughing and whispering in their little bubble of deceit, I went out to meet Emma. We hadn't spoken in years, but seeing her at a party the previous week had reignited something inside me. Emma was beautiful, carefree, and exactly the kind of distraction I needed. And just like that, I set my plan in motion. Sophie wasn't the only one who could play this game. I didn't set out to betray Sophie. At least, that's what I told myself in the beginning. But after days of stewing in anger, I realized I couldn't sit by and let her lies consume me. If she was going to betray me with Ben, then maybe I needed to remind myself that I had options too. Maybe I needed to prove to myself more than anyone else that I wasn't powerless in this. Emma. I hadn't thought about her in years. We had a brief history before I met Sophie, but nothing serious. She'd always been the one who got away, though I never gave it much thought until I ran into her a week ago at a party. I hadn't been looking for trouble that night. I'd gone out with friends, hoping to clear my mind, but then I saw her. She hadn't changed much, still stunning, still full of that infectious energy. When she smiled at me across the room, something shifted inside me. In that moment, I wasn't Liam, the jealous, insecure husband. I was someone else entirely. I was a man who had been wronged, and Emma, well, she became my chance to take back control. I reached out to her after Sophie's trip started. It wasn't difficult. A few messages back and forth, some casual flirting, and we agreed to meet for drinks. I knew exactly what I was doing. Maybe I wasn't ready to admit it fully to myself yet, but the truth was, I wanted something to happen. I wanted to step outside of the lines of my marriage, just like Sophie had done. If she was free to play her little games, then so was I. When I met Emma at the bar, it felt like no time had passed. We picked up right where we left off all those years ago, laughing and talking as if we were the only two people in the room. It was easy with her, so easy. We had a few drinks, and I could feel myself loosening up, the tension of the past few days melting away. She leaned in close, her hand brushing against mine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt wanted, desired. It didn't take long for us to end up at her place. As I stood there in her apartment, looking at her, everything inside me screamed that this was wrong. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. I had convinced myself that Sophie had already betrayed me, that this was simply payback. And if she could justify whatever she was doing with Ben, then I could do the same with Emma. The evening with Emma felt like an escape, like I was someone else for those few hours. We laughed, we drank, and we talked about old times, all while the tension between us grew thicker. By the time we ended up on her couch, my guilt was already starting to fade, replaced by something more primal, something I hadn't felt in a long time. A feeling of being in control. We didn't talk about Sophie. It wasn't necessary. Emma knew I was married, but she didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer any. In that moment, it didn't matter. It wasn't about my marriage or my problems with Sophie. It was about me, reclaiming a piece of myself that I felt I'd lost. By the end of the night, I was walking out of her apartment, my head spinning with a mixture of satisfaction and regret. What had I just done? In the moment, it had felt like the right thing to do, my way of leveling the playing field. But now, in the harsh light of the city streets, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As I drove home, I kept replaying the evening in my head, the way Emma had looked at me, the way she made me feel. It was a feeling I hadn't had with Sophie in a long time. But was it worth it? Did this make me any better than Sophie? When I got home, the house was dark and quiet, just as it had been the past few nights. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, wondering if Sophie had tried to reach me again. I knew I should feel guilty. Hell, I did feel guilty. But at the same time, a part of me felt justified, even liberated. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about me realizing that my life didn't have to revolve around Sophie and her lies. As the days passed, I continued seeing Emma. It became easier each time, the guilt slowly fading into the background. We met a few more times while Sophie was away, and each time, I felt a little more distant from my marriage, a little more detached from the man I used to be. Emma never pushed for more. She didn't ask for commitment or promises. She was an escape, and that's all I needed her to be. But as Sophie's return drew closer, I knew the facade couldn't last forever. The reality of what I had done, what we had done, would eventually catch up to me. And when it did, there would be consequences. I wasn't naive enough to believe I could hide this from Sophie forever. If she could lie to me, I could lie to her, right? But deep down, I knew the truth had a way of coming out. And it wouldn't be long before we both had to face what we had done to each other. The night before Sophie returned home, I sat in my car outside Emma's apartment, staring at my phone. A message from Sophie was waiting, telling me how excited she was to come home, how much she missed me. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat there, replaying everything in my mind, wondering how I'd gotten to this point. I had set out to get revenge on Sophie, to hurt her the way she had hurt me. But now, standing at the edge of this betrayal, I wasn't sure who had really won. All I knew was that the man I had been when Sophie left for that conference wasn't the same man waiting for her to come home. Sophie came back the next day, and I could feel the shift in the air as soon as she walked through the door. She smiled at me, that familiar smile I used to love, but now it felt hollow. She tried to wrap her arms around me, planting a kiss on my cheek, but I didn't respond the way she expected. I pulled back slightly, enough for her to notice. "How was your trip?" I asked, keeping my voice even, as if I hadn't spent the last few days drowning in suspicions and guilt. "It was good," she replied, a little too quickly. "Busy, but good. I'm glad to be home, though." She was trying to act normal, like everything was fine, but I could see the cracks. She was hiding something, just as I had been. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sophie started unpacking her bags, chatting about the conference, the people she met, and how exhausting the whole thing had been. She mentioned Ben briefly, casually slipping his name into the conversation like it didn't mean anything. But to me, every mention of him felt like a jab to the chest. I saw Sarah sent me some photos from the trip, I said, gauging her reaction. Her body tensed for a moment before she turned around, forcing a smile. Oh, that's nice of her. Nice? That's all she had to say? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me again. I wanted to confront her right there, to show her the messages and the video, to make her explain herself. But I held back. There would be a better moment for this. I wasn't ready to let her off the hook just yet. The next few days were awkward. We went through the motions of our daily routine, but there was an undeniable distance between us. Sophie acted like she was trying to fix things making dinner, suggesting we go out for drinks or watch a movie together, but I could tell it was forced. She was trying to smooth over whatever tension had built up before the trip, but neither of us could ignore the elephant in the room. One evening, Sophie suggested a romantic night in, complete with candles, wine, and soft music playing in the background. I want to make things right, she said, her voice soft, her eyes searching mine. I know we've been fighting a lot lately, and I hate that. I just want us to get back to how we used to be. I wanted to laugh, to throw it all in her face. She had no idea what I knew. But as I looked at her, I couldn't help but wonder if this was her way of trying to cover up her guilt. Maybe she felt just as bad as I did. Maybe she was trying to rewrite her betrayal, pretending everything was fine so she wouldn't have to face the truth. After dinner, I excused myself to the bathroom, needing a moment to breathe. That's when everything changed. I had left my phone on the kitchen counter, and when I returned, Sophie was standing there, staring at the screen. She looked up at me, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Who's Emma?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My heart dropped. I had been so careful, or at least I thought I had been. But there it was. A message from Emma, asking if I wanted to meet up again. For a second, I froze, not knowing what to say. But then, something in me snapped. I wasn't going to lie about this. Not after everything Sophie had done. Not after the endless nights of suspicion and betrayal. She deserved the truth. "She's someone I've been seeing while you were gone," I said coldly, watching her face crumble. "What?" she stammered, her eyes wide with shock. "Liam, how could you? How could I?" I shot back, my voice rising. "How could you, Sophie? Don't pretend like you're innocent in all of this. I know about Ben. I know everything." Her eyes filled with tears as she stepped back, shaking her head. "No, Liam, it's not what you think. I never. Ben and I. It wasn't like that. Don't lie to me." I shouted, all the anger I'd been holding and finally spilling out. "I saw the messages, the videos. You've been cheating on me, and now you're trying to act like I'm the one who ruined everything." She stood there, stunned, her tears falling silently as she struggled to find the words. It wasn't like that. Ben, he's just my boss. We got close, but I didn't." She stopped, realizing how pointless her denials were now. "It was stupid. A mistake. I swear. It didn't mean anything." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "That's the best you've got? It didn't mean anything? You've been lying to me for months, Sophie. I trusted you, and you threw it all away." She wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. "Liam, please. I love you. I'm sorry. It was a stupid, meaningless mistake. But we can fix this, can't we? We can move past it." I looked at her, the woman I had loved, the woman I had married. And for the first time, I realized that the love we once shared was gone, buried beneath lies, betrayal, and pain. "I don't think we can," I said quietly, my voice cold. "Because I don't love you anymore, Sophie. Not after what you did." Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, sobbing. I stood there for a moment, watching her, feeling nothing but a hollow emptiness where my love for her had once been. There was no going back, not after everything we'd done to each other. I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting at the table, broken and defeated. Upstairs, I packed a bag, knowing that when I left, I wouldn't be coming back. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief. Sophie and I had both crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Whatever we had before was gone, and now, all that was left was the fallout. The house was silent when I came downstairs, the kind of silence that feels heavy, suffocating. Sophie was still sitting at the dining table, her head in her hands. Her sobs had quieted down, replaced by the occasional shaky breath. The air between us was thick with everything we hadn't said, with all the lies we had both tried to hide. This was it, the moment everything would unravel. "Sophie," I said, my voice low, but steady. She lifted her head, her eyes swollen and red, the tears still fresh on her cheeks. "We can't keep pretending this is going to work. You know that, right?" She stared at me for a moment, as if trying to process my words, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. Deep down, she knew it was over too. "Liam, I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake, but it doesn't have to end like this. We can fix it." I shook my head, feeling a cold, hard resolve building inside me. "No, Sophie, we can't fix this. You didn't just make a mistake, you made a choice. You chose to lie to me, to betray me. And the worst part is, I don't even think you realize what you've done." Her eyes flashed with a mix of guilt and desperation. "I know I hurt you, Liam, but it wasn't what you think. Ben, he never meant anything to me. It was stupid. I got caught up in the attention, in feeling important again. But it wasn't real." "That's your excuse?" I asked, incredulous. "You got caught up in it? You were holding his hand in that video. Sophie, you lied to me over and over again. Don't sit here and tell me it didn't mean anything. Because it meant something to me." She winced, as if my words had physically struck her. "Liam, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking again. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But we can get past this. I love you. I never stopped loving you." "I wish that was enough," I said, my voice hollow. "But it's not. I can't unsee what I've seen, Sophie. I can't pretend this didn't happen." For a moment, we both sat there, the weight of our shattered relationship hanging between us. I could see the fear in her eyes now, the realization that this wasn't going to end with a simple apology or a promise to do better. This was real. This was the end. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" I asked, my voice softer now, almost pleading. "You had so many chances, Sophie. So many times you could have come clean, and maybe we could have worked through it. But you didn't. You let it fester, let it destroy us." She buried her face in her hands again, her sobs starting to return. "I didn't know how," she whispered through her tears. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared, Liam. I was scared you'd leave me. I didn't want to lose you." "Well, you lost me anyway," I said coldly. "You lost me the moment you chose to lie." There was a long pause, the silence stretching between us like a canyon. I could feel the finality of it settling in, the realization that we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't come back from. But then, she lifted her head again, and her expression shifted. There was something else in her eyes now, something darker. "You're not exactly innocent either, are you?" she said, her voice sharper than before. "You think I don't know about Emma?" The room seemed to freeze around us. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about?" Sophie let out a bitter laugh, wiping at her eyes. "Don't play dumb, Liam. I saw the message. You've been seeing her, haven't you? While I was away." I didn't answer right away. I wasn't going to deny it. There was no point in pretending anymore. "Yes," I finally said, my voice steady. "I've been seeing her." Sophie's face twisted in pain and anger, raw mixture of emotions. "So, this is your revenge, then? You couldn't handle the idea of me being with someone else, so you decided to go off and have your own little affair?" "It wasn't about revenge," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It was about realizing that I deserve more than this. More than the lies, the betrayal. You weren't the only one who was lonely, Sophie. You weren't the only one who felt abandoned." Her eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and frustration. "I thought we were trying to fix things." "We were never trying to fix anything," I replied, shaking my head. "We were just pretending. We were going through the motions, hoping it would magically get better, but it never did. And now it's too late. Sophie slumped in her chair, her energy drained, the fight leaving her body. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I stood up, my decision made. "I've already filed for divorce," I said, watching her eyes widen in shock. "The papers will be here tomorrow. I suggest you sign them." Tears welled up in her eyes again, and she shook her head. "Liam, please, don't do this. We can still." "It's over, Sophie," I said firmly, cutting her off. "We're done." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, broken and defeated. There was no turning back now. The confrontation was over, and with it, so was our marriage. I walked out of the room, but the weight of everything we'd said clung to me like a dark cloud. Sophie's sobs echoed faintly behind me as I headed upstairs to pack my things. I didn't look back. There was no point. The confrontation had ripped away the last shreds of whatever was holding us together, and now all that was left was the bitter aftermath of our mutual betrayals. The bedroom felt cold as I entered. It had once been a place filled with warmth, love, and memories. Now, it was just a reminder of how far we had fallen. I grabbed a suitcase and started packing just the essentials. I didn't plan on staying here any longer than I needed to. The house wasn't mine anymore. Not really. It was a place filled with too many ghosts, too many lies. As I folded my clothes, my mind kept replaying the confrontation downstairs. Sophie's broken expression, her pleading, her anger. It should have hurt me more than it did, but I felt numb. Maybe that was the real betrayal, not what Sophie had done with Ben, or what I'd done with Emma, but the fact that I didn't feel anything for her anymore. When I finished packing, I took one last look around the room. Our wedding photo was still on the nightstand, a symbol of a promise we had both broken. I picked it up, staring at the image of us on our wedding day. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. I wondered when it had all gone so wrong. A part of me wanted to smash the photo, to destroy the last reminder of the life we had once shared. But I didn't. Instead, I gently placed it face down on the nightstand and walked out of the room for the last time. Sophie was still in the dining room when I came back downstairs. She was sitting there, motionless, staring at nothing. Her eyes were red and swollen, her face pale. The sight of her like that should have broken my heart, but all I felt was a deep, empty sadness. "I'm leaving," I said quietly, breaking the silence. She didn't respond, didn't even look up. I wasn't sure if she even heard me, but it didn't matter. I knew what I had to do. I reached for the doorknob, but just as I was about to leave, her voice cut through the silence. "Liam." I stopped but didn't turn around. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." I stood there for a moment, her words hanging in the air. I wanted to say something, maybe offer forgiveness, or at least some kind of closure, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't have it in me to forgive her. Not now. Maybe not ever. Instead, I just nodded and walked out the door, closing it softly behind me. Outside, the evening air was cool, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside the house. I stood on the porch for a moment, taking a deep breath. It was over. The house, the marriage, the lies, it was all behind me now. But instead of feeling relief, I just felt tired. I got into my car, tossing the suitcase into the back seat. I wasn't sure where I was going yet, but I knew I couldn't stay here. The thought of driving aimlessly for hours crossed my mind, but there was one more thing I had to do. I drove across town, the familiar streets passing by in a blur. As I pulled up in front of Emma's apartment, I realized that this, too, had come to an end. What I had with her wasn't real, not in the way I needed it to be. It was born out of hurt and betrayal, a way to escape the mess that my marriage had become. But now, standing on the other side of it all, I knew it wasn't what I wanted. Emma opened the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. But when she noticed the look on my face, her smile faded. "Liam, what's wrong?" I shook my head, stepping inside. "We need to talk." We sat down, and I told her everything. About Sophie, about the divorce, about how what we had wasn't right anymore. Emma listened, her expression softening with understanding. She didn't argue, didn't try to change my mind. Maybe she had known, deep down, that this was coming. I'm sorry, I said, my voice quiet. I shouldn't have dragged you into this. She gave me a sad smile, reaching out to touch my hand. You didn't drag me into anything, Liam. I knew what this was. I hoped it could be more. I did too, I admitted. But I need to figure things out on my own. Emma nodded, her hand slipping away from mine. I understand. I stood up, giving her one last look. Goodbye, Emma. Goodbye, Liam, she whispered, watching me go. As I drove away, the weight on my chest began to lift, just a little. I had ended two things tonight: my marriage and whatever it was with Emma. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I was free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, the guilt. And now, it was time to start over. Alone, but free.